Thank you all for joining us. This is it's such a delight to be able to do this. This is one of the funnest projects we do. Lunch with friends and strangers, an informal chat about with people that are friends, about people we might not know or maybe have heard of, but need to get to know a little bit better, our strangers. Let me just make sure that our panelists can hear us. Kathy, do you want to check your mute button, perhaps on your speaker button? Okay, there we go. So we want to make sure when we bring our guest, our friend on, that they can hear what we're saying, although we're actually more interested in what they're saying, but that's besides the point. Okay, before we begin, I quickly want to thank a few people. You saw our sponsors, the Cotton Mercury Group and Morgan Stanley, Carolina Meadows. Have been such a great help. We're really partnering well with Flyleaf Books, doing a lot of our formal programs. I call this an informal program over at Flyleaf Books in our studio there, and they've been such a great help for us. But especially, we want to thank the General Alumni Association, who is putting this whole project on together with us. We started this in the spring. Kat Nichols and Tania Pettis and Douglas and everyone over at the GAA have been so great in offering these programs and partnering with us, and hopefully we're getting people who are coming from outside the triangle through the GAA joining us for this project. We don't spend a lot of time on this. We want to get right to it, and the first thing I want to do is bring our friend in, and that is Kathryn Hunter Williams. Kathy, welcome. You can turn on your camera.
Hi, can you hear me?
I certainly can, and you
Okay,
can
good.
hear, like I said, it's more important that we can hear you than you hear me, but at least you could, it was good music, by the way, if you didn't hear it, it was fantastic. I want to welcome you. Kathryn Hunter Williams is a professor of dramatic arts and is an actor, and which is really great because I love working with our different friends who bring us different perspectives, and getting this perspective from someone who is embodied, if you will, our stranger, is really, really exciting. And we, of course, want to make sure you know, if you do not know already, who our stranger is. So I'm going to pull up a little image, because, and not a stranger, hopefully, to many of you, and maybe that's why you're here. But I will say I was surprised. I taught my class today, or actually this was on Wednesday. We had about 25 students, and I asked them who knew who Ida B. Wells was, and I'd say I had about 7 or 8 raise their hands. And I would think that Ida B. Wells, who I'll show you now, I'm sorry, I gave it away, didn't I? This is, I gave it away. This is, well, they all know why they're here. This is our stranger. And so what we're going to do is sort of start, this is Ida B. Wells. When I look at this image, I just see just nothing but strength, determination. I also see incredible kindness and compassion. And I know we read a lot into pictures and whatnot, but Kathy, what can you tell us about just this image of Ida B. Wells and what this conjures up for you, and how we can sort of situate Ida B. Wells in a broad sense?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a beautiful image. I mean, I look at this picture and what I see is a young woman looking so firmly and gloriously towards the future. I mean, I find it remarkable to think about that this woman was born right before the end of the Civil War, and the breadth of change and things that she saw in this country, the massive amount of change, the way that she embodied both her fearlessness and her determination to speak up against injustice is just so inspiring. The look on her face, first of all, I mean, she was beautiful. Right. I
Oh,
mean, she's this
gorgeous.
beautiful young woman. And when you read about her and learn about her, you know that, she was called the princess of the press, right? She's engaging, she is smart, she is verbal, she's very, very principled and not shy at all about confronting what she felt were the wrongs in society. So I look at this woman and I try to put myself, I'm like, wow, you are one of the first freed people in this country. What her parents gave her, what her society gave her, and look at her eyes. She's just so firmly looking at the future but understanding the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, it's remarkable too. I think one of the things you want to situate, you mentioned times of momentous change, right? Going, of course, the Civil War was, we'll just face it, the beginning of necessary changes that are still going on in our country today in terms of coming to
Yeah.
terms with our society and race, but also the women's movement and whatnot. And I just pull up this little picture, also situating Ida B. Wells. I found this interestingly enough in Vogue magazine. Not that I was looking, I found it online. Let me be honest with you. I wasn't looking through my subscription to Vogue magazine, but
Hey, look, Teen Vogue is doing a pretty good
I
job. Let
understand
us
that.
not no
I,
no shade on Teen Vogue,
no,
okay?
absolutely. I've heard the same thing, and I think this is a fantastic image. So I pulled this up just to say, this gives us a little bit of a context for situating Ida B. Wells within, a remarkable time, and people who frankly do not get enough attention drawn to them. This is the age of sort of an intersectional struggle for women's rights as well as for an
Mhm.
anti-racist fight. So um, do you think of Ida B. Wells in this context as sort of fighting on multiple fronts and
I mean, I certainly do, Max. And here's the thing. That's why I think she's so relevant. I'm so happy that we're celebrating her today because she is so relevant to what I think women today are actually the intersectionality that we're walking in. And a lot of the challenges that she talks about, we're still dealing with those today, right? We're still talking about, she did have butt heads with some of the suffragists around the fact that they wanted to put Black women at the back of the line, that they did not want Frederick Douglass sitting at the table at the table in Atlanta, Georgia, because Susan B. Anthony knew that she'd lose white Southern women votes. And Ida B. Wells was very verbal about that. She told her, she's like, well, you're wrong. You are holding us all back, by not including all of us. So she is still fighting on the same front that today, as an African American woman, we are still dealing with these same issues where when are we told to step back? When are we told that our time is not now? When are people not understanding that our rights and the issues that we're fighting for will impact every single person in this country? And Black women have consistently been told to be at the bottom of the ladder and to be we're thought of as less than. you
Mhm.
know um, I can't remember who it was who said Black women are the mule of the world, right? It might have been Zora Neale Hurston. Um, so she was already involved in this, which again, thinking about her today makes me have that much more respect and just admiration for her. She was born enslaved. She was
Mhm.
in that remarkable moment in our country where the very brief promise of Reconstruction was destroyed and
Mhm.
snatched away from us. And she saw it, and she witnessed, and she wrote, and she fought about these things. So, the women's movement is the suffrage movement. As we've been examining it, especially in this year of celebration, really how it really put Black women behind white women.
Mhm.
And we're still seeing some of the political fallout of these same ideologies, certainly in our political atmosphere today.
This picture here. First of all, when I look at this picture, I hope we can do biography shows on every one of these powerful and important women. But it also makes you realize, what we've done with American history is we've taken women's history and made it this separate category, and we've taken the history of race and made it a separate category. And in this discussion today, we can kind of see this as, and again, this is very much in the spirit of the 1619 project, to look at all of this as is a piece of the American story, and trying to figure out how it is that we can realize the promises of our Constitution and the freedoms and whatnot. And women are struggling for this, and of course, African Americans are struggling for this. But it's all of a piece. And when you put this picture together and see this as, I guess what I'm getting at is Ida B. Wells has one struggle in life, and that's the struggle for justice, and it has many different areas in which it's not being achieved.
Yes, I mean, she certainly understood some things. I mean, again, I just think this is remarkable, when we talk about the history of her life and what she had to deal with as a young woman growing up. But she certainly understood the power of ownership, and she understood the power of ownership, the power of the press.
Mhm.
She, had owned newspapers, and she really understood how the history had to be connected, that it wasn't just one standalone piece of history, right? That it was really understanding, which is what we are still trying to weave together today, which is what the 1619 project does so powerfully, is we weave together from the beginning of our time here, when we came and invaded these shores, and we took our indigenous brothers and sisters and destroyed them, and how all of this is connected, and how it still plays out today. But she was doing that, in at the turn of the century. She was
Mhm.
doing that at the end, in the 1890s. And she understood that, and she put it together for not just the Black community, but also for white America and for the European community as well.
I love that Nicole Hannah Jones had this wonderful quotation. I consider her my spiritual grandmother. She was a trailblazer in every way, as a feminist, as a suffragist, as an investigative reporter, as a civil rights leader. She was just an all around badass.
She was totally, and she was a diva. She was a beautiful woman. She
Mhm.
was this, and she was this incredible mother who,
Mhm.
of the first of us, all of us today, who are, if you have your little kids and you're home with your kids and trying to homeschool, or if your kids are all grown like mine, but she took her kids with her and nursed her baby at some of her speaking engagements.
I think every time we hear about an amazing woman, and then you realize that the amazing woman is also a mother, you realize this is a person who's doing two full-time jobs, and including going for advocating for justice, and then going above and beyond what you have to do in the normal life to advocate for others is just truly remarkable. Because even today, we're seeing how much women are handling the burden of the homeschooling more than, and handling the burden of keeping the domestic economy going far more than men are. I'm trying to do my part, I promise. But it's definitely a burden that falls into.
Mhm.
So when you see someone like Ida B. Wells, it's truly remarkable.
Yeah. And she was really dealing with some serious, real threats of violence. I mean, we cannot forget that this, we've just digested what happened to the governor in Michigan today, but we
Mhm.
cannot forget that this is Ida B. Wells, alone, um, traveling around the
Mhm.
country, and she is being seriously threatened with bodily harm. Not only did she witness some of these lynchings, but as
Mhm.
she wrote about the lynching issues, she was being threatened with it. So
Yeah.
we can't forget that either. There's an incredible amount of courage that this woman had.
Well, let's situate her, and then we'll get to some of the things that she. But let's situate her at birth, 1862, Holly Springs, Mississippi, in the
Hmm.
middle of the Civil War,
Hmm.
um, raised in conflict. And so, what can we learn from the early life? This was a period of transition, as you mentioned, the Reconstruction. Do we have many records of her activities before she lost her parents at an early age? She lost her parents at what? At the age of
She was
when she was
16.
16, right? And her parents died
Hmm.
of yellow fever.
Yellow
And so,
fever.
what was that life like for her in those 16 years?
Yeah, I mean, as far with the research that I've done and what I know about her life, I think that's what's important to me is that her parents embraced. They were freedmen. They embraced the opportunities and the benefits of the Freedmen's Bureau. They were very active in terms of their church life. They educated their children. They understood the power of education. And something that I think is so important that I really want to emphasize is that with what I've read, it says that she had a really kind of lovely childhood. And this is
Mhm.
important because I think so often we want to focus on we focus because the trauma and the violence is so horrific, it tends to take over the Black joy and the
Mhm.
love and the families that Black Americans have had and continue to
Yeah.
have. So I think that is really key because I think it grounds her. She's raised with love. She's raised with education. She's raised in a loving, a generous, and a great kind of social society. And let's be real. All the things that are in the outside world, of course, were still going on. It was
Mhm.
still post Civil War. There were still threats of violence. All of that was happening. But her core family seemed to have given her like this inner core and
Yeah.
strength that we then see come into play when her parents die from yellow fever,
So
right?
it
When they.
seems
Mhm.
that happens in 1878, I believe, or 16 years old. And what's interesting about that is, of course, the years intervening in those 16 years are not entirely happy times, but they are the era of Reconstruction. And they are the era in which there might be some hope of African American involvement in politics. There certainly see these legislatures dominated by Republicans in southern states. And what is remarkable is the sort of the death of the parents right around the same time that Reconstruction is really sort of being destroyed after the elections of 1876 and 1877. So is that a she ends up raising her five siblings right when the
Yes.
society is getting worse, if you
That's
will.
right. Now, look, I'm telling you, this woman was no joke, right? I mean, just think about it. I mean, even if we try to equate our 16-year-old selves, I mean, my goodness, I was nowhere near ready to do anything like that. But, she took, and they wanted to take her brothers and sisters away. I mean, just out of concern, there was some talk about dividing them up amongst, as often happens in Black culture, right? The adoptions may not be formal, but when something happens to the parents, the society, the culture, the community will pick up children and take care of them. But she said no. No, my parents would roll over in their graves if we were separated. She leaves school. She finds a job. I think she faked her age. Actually, I think I read that somewhere that she
Mm,
actually kind of forged how that she was older than she was. She gets a job teaching and she continues to raise her siblings and to continue as when she can her education. So again, I think this is a part of that core, that loving family centered
mhm.
that her parents gave her faith, her family, and we often overlook that. That is such a tragic thing that we do in when we re-examine some of these lives, right?
So was she the oldest child then, we assume, or?
Yeah, she was the oldest.
And do we know how long she was responsible for the personal care? I mean, I assume that she is always going to be invested in her siblings for the rest of their lives. But do you have a sense of how long that she had sort of really being a ward of these?
I'm not exactly sure because I don't know the age of her siblings when her
Mhm.
parents passed away. I'm not exactly sure what the age spread was. I do know that she continued teaching. Well, then she lost her job teaching because she spoke out against the conditions of the school. She said our books are not good enough, our physical building's not good enough, and she indeed was, I think, fired by the and she might have been teaching in an all-black school district by that
Yeah,
time. But she was fired from her teaching job. So I'm not exactly sure how long she did it, but because
yeah,
I've never read anything about any of the siblings
yeah.
falling into hard times or being lost, I think she must have completed that. Or maybe then also had some support probably from the community as she began to do her writing and her journalism career began.
We have this sense, looking at just the brief biography, one of the areas where she sort of suddenly gets notoriety is for the train incident, right? When she's 21
Hey,
years old. And why don't
yep.
you tell us a little bit about that story?
So, this is what is so interesting about learning your history because, of course, we tend to think of Rosa Parks as the first African American who said, I am not going to give up my seat. And while Ms. Parks, no, was not taking anything from what she did and her place in history, there were several incidents that happened before that. And when
Mhm.
we don't learn that, what we think is that African Americans were subservient or were willing to stay under the yoke for a longer time than we were. And Ida B. Wells' story is a perfect example of that. Before the Jim Crow laws were put into place and the segregation in the public transportation was the law of the land, especially in the South, she was riding in a car that was appropriate for her. They come to her on this train. They decide that as they get further into the South, that she needs to move to another car, to a smoker car, so that separate from all the white passengers. And her telling of this story is so great because she's like, she fought him, she bit him. I mean,
Yeah, I heard.
she did.
And
She
she's 21
kicked.
years old, right?
She's
So that
21 years
fiery
old.
young woman, right?
Exactly. And she's, of course, and let's not forget the clothing of the day. Okay. So, women were corseted. You were in, layers of clothes. You had petticoats. So it's not like today when we're running around in our sweatpants and our tennis shoes, right? I
Mhm.
mean, there was a lot of material, but she, in all of that, she kicked, she bit, she gave them what for, and they eventually overpowered her and they did move her to this other car. She was eventually, I think, thrown off the train, but she sued them.
Mhm.
She took them to court. And, she knew that the freedom, what was promised to Black Americans, was hers to claim. She actually won that case the first time around.
Yeah.
She was awarded $500, which, was like an incredible
Yeah.
amount of money. And then, of course, later on, it was overturned by,
Yeah.
some racist court.
Yeah.
But
Unfortunate.
it's brave, right? It's incredibly brave and very just so forthright. So she's very courage,
And
lots of courage.
that I imagine that sort of, because the public outcry, this became a cause célèbre, this became, or maybe notorious, right? Other people against her, I'm sure. But that this would, I guess, is this supposition that this triggered her to a more public life, because by the time she was 25, she's the co-owner and editor of the Free Speech and Headlight, that the by the mid 1880s. So do you feel like that's a trigger to get more sort of public from having that public event?
Yes, because I think as she related that story and she began to write about that story and she had to explain, and especially when it was taken away from her, right? Especially when the decision was reversed, as she began to then put stories into articles. Now, into newspapers. I'm sorry. Now I know she bought interest in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
I think she saved $100 and went down and bought 1/3 interest so that people could no longer tell her to stop talking about things. This is where I I just love this woman's brilliance, rather than be pushed back. And remember, this is also a period when women were not supposed to be outspoken. Women were supposed to take the back seat. Women were, all these other societal rules that she was pushing back against. So she goes down and she buys 1/3 of the newspaper. And then she begins to start to write and to publish about the indignities and about all the injustices that are happening. But of course, her big journalistic career is when she starts to publish stories around the numbers of lynchings that
Yeah,
to start to
sure.
happen.
And I've got some images of those coming up. Just as a curiosity, I was um, we have a program coming up next Wednesday with Lenise Williams from Art History on
Yes.
digitization of Black newspapers
Yeah.
and how much so much is being lost. And I was really shocked. I went and looked for an image of the Free Speech and Headlight, and I
Yeah.
could not find one. And I
Yeah.
thought, there's not a masthead for me to find this. So tune in, come and join us, folks. Humanities.unc.edu next Wednesday if you're interested in that
Yeah.
program. And I'm going to ask that question and be like, is this an example? Because I was really surprised I could not find the front page of the Free Speech and Headlight. And certainly, as you had mentioned, and I'll get to some of these images, as you had
But
mentioned.
no lynching images. Please don't show any
No,
lynching
I will
Okay.
try. I we
I
knew
knew you
you.
weren't.
No,
Okay.
yeah, you know my slideshow, and I'm not into. We don't do shocking images. We show things that celebrate fighting back against
Of course.
injustice. So in
Good.
this case, what is being published, of course, are some of the first investigative journalism on this incredible topic. Lynching had always been portrayed as, oh, this is people doing vigilantes, but these were bad folks that they went after. And yet, of course, what we know now is what Ida B. Wells was able to expose to us. How did this develop? This focus on, obviously it develops from the horror of seeing her own people treated this way, but individually, what inspired her to write so detailed about lynch law
Yeah.
and the Red Record?
She has a very personal story about losing a very close personal friend. In the period of Reconstruction, when so many newly freed men and women were starting businesses and finding an economic footing, which of course is something we are still talking about today, the consequences, the results of this lost opportunity, right? And she had a friend who had a grocery store I think this was in Memphis, I'm pretty sure. Um, and it was right across the street from a white grocery store owner. And the white grocery store owner, they got upset because they were losing business to this black grocery store owner. And so they, as often happens, of course, most of these incidents are around the supposed assault of a white woman. There is some exchange. I'm not going to actually quote it because I might be getting my facts mixed up,
Mm,
but there is some sort of accusation made in town. There is an arrest. And then her friend, who she was very close to, this man and his wife, I think she was the godmother to this gentleman's child, ends up three black business owners get dragged out of the jail and are lynched. And this is where she starts to write about it. And of course, this particular one was the most personal one because it was someone who she knew so well.
mhm,
And as the rise in lynchings, the numbers of lynchings go up, she just, starts to just be relentless about making this public to the rest of the country and eventually to the world, to say, look at what is happening. Um,
mhm. It's interesting about these. I noticed these two pamphlets, these two texts. She's based in Memphis writing, but at the same time, these are being published in Chicago. These are being published in New York. She already had access to a national kind of platform, which is remarkable. Someone her age and in her circumstances to
You know,
do
because
this.
again, she understood the power of the press. One of the things that
Mhm.
happened post Civil War was that, these Black newspapers, mostly started by churches, often are the ones that begin to pop up, and because now we have this way to share this information, right? And
Mhm.
so she starts to use that, and this is why she understood why it was important to have
Yeah,
ownership of it as well. I mean, this is what she said. I want to quote this from her.
please.
She said, "In slave times, the Negro was kept subservient and submissive by the frequency and severity of the scourging. But with freedom, a new system of intimidation came into vogue. The Negro was not only whipped and scourged, he was killed." And I read that, right? And I think, so here's what we're dealing with today. I mean, this is the legacy of the assault against Black and Brown bodies by our law enforcement, right? And she is understanding this in the early, the late 1800s.
Hmm.
So she would knew she had to get this word out, that she had to be specific about what happened, in detailing the events of these
Yeah.
horrific acts, and in getting the public to
And
be outraged about it.
not to put too fine a point on it, there's also a particular rise in vigilantism these days that has
Oh,
scary echoes of the past. I just want
absolutely.
to throw this out there, folks, that of course we have the Red Record as a wonderful project, and if you look down on the chat, a wonderful project that is, of course, inspired by the Red Record. Seth Koch and the team at UNC have been tracking all of the various lynchings in North Carolina. So this work is continuing to inspire. Ida B. Wells's project continues and lives today. I think that's important. One other thing I want to bring up, which is interesting, is that this doesn't go unnoticed, nor does it go sort of, if you will, unpunished. I'm going to just pull up this little clip from a newspaper. "Driven from home, the fearless spirit of Ida B. Wells, editor of the Memphis Free Speech, has been spoken of in these columns and her bravery commended. Among all civilized people, courage commends itself to brave people, but among barbarians of the Memphis stripe, her courage was a menace. So these brave, chivalrous Southern people made up their minds to drive this plucky little woman out of town. They waited for an opportunity, and last week it came." So she does leave Memphis and, of course,
Yeah,
travels to
yeah.
Chicago.
I mean, she's out of town actually when the word comes down. I think she was in New York, and she never returned. She didn't come back to the South, I think, for like, I want to say 30 years, like several, like quite a while. She does not go back to the South until I think the 1920s, the late 1920s. She goes to Chicago, she stays in New York, she goes to Europe, but she
Yeah.
never comes back. So fortunately, because I think they would have harmed her. I think they would have thought nothing about
Mhm.
taking her and doing some harm to her. So
Well, they
thank God
certainly
she was out.
and they certain so I want to she goes to Chicago, and I will talk a little bit about the international travels. And I do thank everyone, as always in our biography series. It's too interesting and we end up going a little bit over time, so I hope you're still with us. Kathy, are you still ready to keep going a little bit?
Look, I'm ready because we haven't even talked about the play yet.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely. No, we got a lot more to do for sure. So but we'll try to get through some of these topics quickly here. Again, it's a shame because, like with everything, this is a person who deserves, a month, not a one show. But she ends up falling in love, from what we
yes.
can tell, and ends up, in
Yay.
it with a good partnership, which is a great
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I love this story because she meets Ferdinand at the World's Fair, right? She goes to the Chicago World's Fair with I think it was Frederick Douglass and Ferdinand. And they set up, of course, there was no Black representation at all, right? So they set up, they create a pamphlet, our journalists, right? She creates a pamphlet about the injustices in America and about lynching and about what's going on in the country. And they hand out this pamphlet and meet people and talk to people during this World's Fair. And like a lot of African Americans who went there or migrated, there is this great migration, as we know, to several areas of the country, but certainly a lot of us settled in Chicago, and she stays. And now this is where the actress in me comes out. This is where I'm like, oh, I bet they fell in love at first sight, or they just seem to. What little I read, there seems to have been this. There's clearly this deep love that existed between them. I think
Mhm.
he's remarkable because again, this is the time period when women were supposed to get married and have babies and stay home and take the back seat to your man. You were not supposed to be ahead
Hmm.
of him. So what does that say about Ferdinand? Right? That
Hmm.
he had no problem. He understood her career. He understood who she was. They married. They had, I think, 4 children.
Hmm.
It was four
I
or
think I got
five.
a picture. I got a picture here.
Um,
There we go.
yeah, right? I mean, look at that beautiful family. Look at that beautiful home. She continued to work and to travel. And as I said, she even took her first son was with her on some of these early speaking engagements. And Susan B. Anthony told her that she thought she was dividing her focus. Of course,
Hmm.
Susan B. Anthony had the nerve to tell her how to live her life, I guess.
Hmm.
And
Well,
she said, you shouldn't. Susan B. Anthony's like, that's why I never married. I owe myself to my my message. And Ida was like, well, good for you, but I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
well,
Well,
and it's
that's not
interesting
a
too.
quote.
Ferdinand is, as you mentioned, Ferdinand is a remarkable person as well, because Ferdinand is someone who, if he can't articulate it, can understand intersectional power and understand,
Absolutely.
and himself being discriminated against, was able to have the empathy, because not everybody who's discriminated against has the empathy to then sort of grant that someone else might be suffering their own discrimination and in ways that they don't understand. But he had that empathetic nature, it seems, to be able to accept this aspect.
Well, there's an expression a term that was known and used really until very recently, I think, maybe the 1950s or so. But I would say that both Ida and Ferdinand were what we call race men and women. And these were men and women in the Black community who put the injustices and the drive for equality for the Black race above everything else. And Ferdinand was a race man and a lawyer. And along with the same sort of person as we think about it, Frederick Douglass. So they, so yes, so helping the race to progress towards equality was first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And I still will say, given the time period, that he was must have been an amazing man. I mean, she fell in love with him. He had to be amazing, and he understood and supported her throughout the rest of her career. So quite remarkable,
Yeah,
and what a
and
beautiful.
it redounded on both. I'm just going to show this briefly, but it redounded on both of them. And just again to make it clear that we're not talking about obscure people here. I brought this up. Nicole Hannah Jones had this in 2017 when Ida B. Wells married. It was a page one story.
Oh
This is
yeah.
a this is a clip from the New York Times on page one.
That's right. That's
You
right. Yeah. Yeah. And this is why it's so important for us to understand. I mean, look at that hat though. Okay. Now
oh,
the
come
now the
on,
actress and now the actress in me is coming out. Look at that dress and that hat. I mean,
oh
what a
yeah, you
fabulous.
must have talked to the
Oh,
costume people. Be like,
oh,
come on, get me
no.
that hat.
Let me tell you, that's just beautiful. It's just so remarkable. But I mean, this is the thing about when you don't know your history, when you think that our history is only comprised of the trauma and the violence that we have endured,
Mhm.
this is where we lose sight of, and people don't understand that we come from a long line of fighters and of people who are going to fight for justice. So every, although each setback takes a little bit of you. We have the legacy of our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, our great great grandmothers, and our great 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 grandmothers and grandfathers to stand on. So yeah, she was a page one story. I mean, they called her the princess of the press. She was a big deal.
Yeah.
She went to England, right, and she spoke before all of these sort of abolitionist and equality, equal justice folks in England, right?
Yep.
And she made
Right.
everybody mad at home because
So
she told the truth.
So here we have a clipping from a British newspaper describing how there were even some people in the Birmingham audiences complaining, but then we have you know uh, a Negro adventurous. I see the Memphis Daily Commercial pays me the compliment of calling me a Negro adventurous. This is Ida B. Wells writing about the fact that people are complaining about this woman going out and shining a light on American injustice.
Right.
It doesn't put America in a good light, and it's interesting too that there was even some complaints about her in England itself. One of the things I think is really important that the IDB, that the story Nicole Hannah Jones has, and the idea that these people are known quantities. It's important for us to shine a light on what we think are sort of obscure people in history, and then when the light is shined on, we realize they're not obscure.
No.
That they've shown a light during their own era that we can learn so much from the light that they showed and the way that they were seen and understood in their time. We're not resurrecting obscure people here. We're resurrecting or shining a light on people that are incredibly important, and we're recognized as such
Hey,
in the time period.
we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, and as a people, to come through enslavement in this country means that we have an inner core and a strength that there is a well of strength to draw from. And
Mhm.
so when you don't, that's why knowing your history and sharing your history, things like what you're doing this program today, the Ida B. Wells Center that we have here at UNC, the play reading, all of the
Mhm.
dramatic things that I have done around her, it's important that we bring these stories to life and that everybody understands them and knows them.
Great. I want to, we'll do that. We have a couple of pictures. I'll just show them quickly here. This is very grainy, folks. It was grainy when I found it, and I cannot find a clean picture of it. But just the notion that, again, this continues. This is by 1913. We're talking about, a woman who is certainly in upper middle age at this point, and still involved, obviously, in the Women's Party, Cook County Women's Party. I know that you had mentioned that there were tensions within the suffragette movement, but here is flying the flag proud and prominently in this picture.
The power of these Black women social clubs or the Black women's club movement is something is something else that we don't really talk about enough. How our early grandmothers and great grandmothers understood the power of organization and how to organize people in order to enforce change. And certainly these women's groups were super powerful. Everything everywhere from playwriting to social justice issues. So she was right there in the thick of it. And she, again, when I look at the totality of her life, and you think about someone born into slavery, and then that photograph from 1913, where she's standing there free and unencumbered, and asking, demanding her right to vote, is just really remarkable. It's a remarkable
Yeah.
life.
One just Kat Nichols, our dear friend of the GAA, and this is something I do want to bring up. We call her Ida B. Wells. She's also Ida B. Wells Barnett. How does that distinction come, and does she continue to when does she use the hyphenated name? When does she not? And what should we do?
Well, here's a great thing. I love her husband she was often introduced as Ida B. Wells. And this is why I'm digging on Ferdinand, because his ego, he had his ego enough in check to not be like, you need to take my name and use my name, right? Uh, I don't know
Hey,
if he
look,
really
he
sounded
already
like that.
married. So he should be proud. I married someone whose name is already out there.
Well, right, but this is the understanding of how remarkable I think that that their understanding or their relationship or whatever their mutual vision was, because she was often still, even when she was married, introduced as Ida B. Wells. Now,
Yeah.
because she loved, I mean, she I'm sure, I would say, without any, I don't have any research on this, but as secure as she was and who she was and how she wanted to be represented, she probably chose to use her married name whenever she felt it was necessary,
Yeah.
which is probably why we know her today as Ida B. Wells Barnett. She didn't lose the Wells, which is what most
Mhm.
married women did, right? You
Yeah.
give up your maiden name, but she kept them both. And I think that just lets us, again, it's more indication of the kind of woman that she was.
Yeah. And and this continued. We're going to get to the play here very soon, and because we have to get to some audience questions if we have them, and of course finish up at some point. I don't want to keep you the whole time here, Kathy, all day. Although I could talk about this all day.
I could too.
So I found these later pictures, and of course this is a wonderful letter to the editor, signed Ida B. Wells Barnett. This is of course related to the awful violence in Chicago in 1919. We see here. This is perhaps hard to believe, wanting to be a delegate to the Republican National Convention, if we understand where race politics in the United States have turned out in political party affiliation today. But still, again, as Ida B. Wells Barnett, still active to the very end of her days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, she never gave up fighting because there was always more work to do.
Yeah.
Right. And she also, later on in her life in Chicago, she started a housing complex for newly arrived migrants from the South African American
Mhm.
women and men as a place to safely land, to be able to, get yourself reorganized and re-energized in order to live and make a
During
living
a
in
great
Chicago.
migration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, during the migration, exactly. And so,
Yeah.
she was kind of was wanting it to be like Jane Addams, Hull House, but
Yep.
it didn't quite have the support. It didn't have the financial support. It did last for a while, but she understood that people were fleeing the South, and she, as herself, as a Southern woman, she created this space. So she was always encouraging people. She was always supporting people. She was constantly talking about the rights of Black Americans and equality, and again, she understood the power of the press. This to me says, like, I think about Ida as I'm like, she's almost like, this is going to maybe reduce her too much, but the way that Twitter and social media is working in our world today, the way that some of these violent encounters that are being caught on film, and
Mhm.
only because they are now being caught on cell phone cameras, are the rest of the world beginning to believe us? I mean, African Americans have been saying for 400 years this
Mhm.
is happening, but we weren't quite believed, or it was covered up, and it was, we were not able to get justice. But now, with the ability to capture it on film, people are having to really reckon and face and come to terms with this. She does this with words. She does
Yeah.
this with her words, with the power of the pen. um, and it's particularly resonant to me, because both my parents were journalists in
Mhm.
the Black newspapers. They both wrote in their careers when they started their careers in the 50s. They were both journalists, and I grew up with sort of understanding the power of the pen and what that can do. But as a woman, again, this young woman, post Civil War, doing all of this on her own, I just find her remarkable. What a reservoir of courage she had.
And what an honor it must be to embody her and to play Ida B. Wells. And Paul, if I could ask you to pull up what's happening on Sunday. We're going to just quickly have Paul share the screen because we are, of course, in the middle of a Ida B. Wells symposium that's free and open to the public. And you'll be doing a reading of this Miss Ida B. Wells, The Light of Truth. Tell us about this performance that you'll be doing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So this is a reading of a very short play called Miss Ida B. Wells, written by Indisha May Holland, Indisha Ida May Holland, actually, which I think is interesting, who was a playwright from Mississippi herself. She has a really well-known play called From the Mississippi Delta, which is done quite a bit. And this one's a little less well-known of her plays, but it's a very short play of the biography of Ida B. Wells. And it's a two-character play. One of us plays Ida B. Wells at an older age, and the other one plays Ida B. Wells and various other characters. And what I find so interesting about this is the second Ida B. Wells play I've done. My first play here at Playmakers was in 1999, was a play called Constant Star. And but in that play, like in this play, um, you need more than one person to play Ida B. Wells. Constant Star, there were five actresses
You
that
see, I pulled
embodied.
up the picture there, right?
Oh, yeah, there I am. Yeah, boy, that's a long time ago. Um, but we had five actresses to play Ida. This is a play written by Tazewell Thompson, because we played her at different stages of her life. It took five of us. And
Mhm.
in this piece that we're reading on Sunday, we have one, you need two actresses, because
Mhm.
what her life was so big. She did so many things. She was one of the founding members of the
Yes,
NAACP.
we haven't even touched on that in
Exact
1999.
it,
Yes.
yeah, right. I mean, she just so the play is a really nice, tight, short um overview of her life, and you kind of meet her as she's thinking about some of the things that have happened to her. You hear a little bit of her younger voice. The other actress, my good friend Rasul Jahan, who's been here, she's a local actress, people will recognize her. She's been on Playmaker stage several times as well. She will play the other characters, from
Mhm.
Susan B. Anthony to Frederick Douglass to young Ida to several other characters, sort of in the play, to give us a sense of her life. So
Right.
it's delightful.
That's right. And by the way, we have registration for the reading of Miss Ida B. Wells down here in the chat. You're welcome to all join us on Sunday for that. One thing, we're going to have to tie it up here pretty soon, like very soon. But I'm curious about the idea of playing Ida B. Wells at different stages in life with different actors. There has to be a through line, though, right? To make this a stable person. So, what is the through line that all five actors would get together and say, how do we maintain a stable Ida B. Wells at the same time as we explore the diversity of her activities and her life?
Well, it's really her drive for justice. I mean, that never leaves her. She from the time that her focus on education and on getting her own education, and then leaving her education to raise her brothers and sisters, but to also teach. She was always, again, I'm going to use that term. She was a race woman. She was constantly focused on the drive for equality and the search for dignity and justice for her people, for her and her people. So that's her through line. So we just see her at different stages, right?
Yeah.
There's a fiery young woman who's on the train who bit and kicked everybody and then went out and bought a gun. She buys a gun when once they passed a law that African Americans can't own guns. She goes out and get one. I think she might have bought two. Um, and then we see, but never is this drive for justice and equality and freedom ever gone from her. So like all of us, as we age and we grow older, our focus may shift in terms of the intensity of where it lands, but that drive never left her. It never left her. And so it's very easy to play it. It's beautiful progression to watch, how it embodies from, the young woman
Hmm.
to the mother to the bride. I mean, at one point
Yeah.
she's a giddy bride. She's getting married, and then she's off overseas, sitting with these dignitaries in England, sipping tea. I mean, it's remarkable, but that's the thing. She never gave that up.
Yeah, and that's obvious from what and even I would just one other time. I just love to look at this image of Ida B. Wells later in life, and looking at if I can get it here, looking at the strength even later in life. Look at that,
Hmm. Hmm. She
remarkable.
so
Just
reminds me of my grandmother, she really does. Even my grandfather ran for as a Republican in Ohio. So I
that is,
understand how things have changed. But yeah, she so reminds me of my grandmother. I mean, there is just a strength. I mean, look at her face, look at
yeah.
her spirit. Her spirit is so settled in her, and her drive, and her, what she knows is right to fight for. I find it so inspiring.
Of course, we read into images a little bit, but that very first image we showed, from around 1895, you see a state when we talk about through lines, right? In the eyes, in the compassion, just
Yes.
some reading on that, and the strength, right? That's a person that last picture of the older Ida B. Wells, that's a person I just want to sit next to for like an entire afternoon and learn from, right? You
Yeah.
just get the sense, and it's the same person in that earlier picture. There's just a really like that through line of strength.
Yeah.
um, Kathy, this has been really great for me. I really am I love getting your perspective from having, sort of gotten inside of Ida B. Wells as well as learned so much about Ida B. Wells. Is there anything final you want to share with our audience about what we should take away?
Yeah, I'll just put on my actress hat for a minute, because one of the things that we try to do is when you begin to embody a character, you look for those given circumstances, you look for those moments that you can connect with in your own life. And I just remember one other incident from her life after she used to begin to write about the lynchings in of her friends in Memphis, and she then puts something into the newspaper where she tells all of the people in town to leave. She says, you know what? They don't want us. They're treating us badly. Go. And the people left. The people got up and left, and they left, and it devastated the economics of the town. And I just think about, when I think about the courage to speak truth to power, to follow the conviction of your heart, and how do you when you're bringing somebody to life, where do you reflect in moments in your own life where you have been able to do that, and where you find moments where you'd like to do it even more. So when I think about that young woman who, just without any kind of ego, it wasn't about I'm the great leader and I can tell everybody to leave town. She just spoke truth to power, and people heard it and left. And I think they all went to Kansas, and she was there with people in Kansas for a couple of years.
Wow.
So to find within myself how you can embody that, her core, her strength, her belief, and her strive for justice, it's something that I can connect to so easily today. And I think our audience will too. I
Yeah.
think we will all enjoy learning about her.
And try to, you embody it on the stage, but then you use it as an example for our lives off the stage as we live our own
Absolutely.
lives. So
Every day that we deal with these students here at UNC, we have to, we're dealing with the next generation. She was an educator,
yeah.
and she She led the
Well,
way.
I will tell you, and I opened up and I said I had about 8 students out of 25 who knew who Ida B. Wells was. By the end of my 30 seconds of telling them who Ida B. Wells was, I hope that we get that number up to maybe 18 or 20. I don't know how many listen, but we're working hard, and this is certainly a one way we can do it. We normally have time for questions. I don't see any questions coming up, and I've taken a lot of your time. If anyone wants to quickly drop a question and answers, we can do that. And I'll wait a few moments here if you would like to ask a question of Kathy Williams, but I have gone over, and I'm also realizing that half an hour is not enough time to talk about
It's
really
not.
important people. So we might just change that in general, and so that people don't have the expectation that they're going to get out of here early.
No, it's
Um,
not. Well, I hope people come to and listen to the play on
yes.
October 18th and then continue to do more research on her. We're again, this play is a very short play. It barely gets into the depth of everything she did, but it's a beautiful overview of her life. And I'm just thrilled to be able to do this. I get to play two great journalists this year. I'm also playing Marvel Cook later on in the season. So
Oh, well,
I'm
don't speak too
embodying.
soon. We'll have to bring you back again. So.
Okay, okay.
Kathy Williams, thank you so much. I want to thank the General Alumni Association for just being such a great partner. This is the funnest project that I do, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity. I want to drive you to humanities.unc.edu, also to carolinak12.org. But we're putting on the Ida B. Wells Symposium. Many of these are open to the public, including the reading. Kathy Williams, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you as our friend here today. And
Thank
come
you.
back with another stranger sometime. You're always
I
welcome.
sure will. Thank you so much, Max. This is great. And what a wonderful project. Thank you all for doing this. I'm so grateful to the Carolina Public Humanities for doing this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We'll see you on stage.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.